A lot of Braves fans were frustrated last week when, in the middle of a losing streak, Atlanta Braves Holdings announced they had just purchased an office complex across the highway from the Battery Atlanta. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on into a special bonus edition of the Braves Today podcast. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball. You can also find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. This is both a podcast and a newsletter, folks. And this show, something I've wanted to do for a little while, and it got to the point where I had to do it last week, right? This was April 2nd. The Braves announced, or Atlanta Braves Holdings, I'm going to clarify all of this in a second. Atlanta Braves Holdings announced that they had purchased the Pennant Park office complex from Rubenstein Partners. It's across the interstate from the Battery Atlanta. It's connected by a pedestrian bridge. I believe it's about a 10-minute walk to get from there to the other. 760,000 square feet of office space across, I think it's 6 buildings. There's 2,700 parking spaces. It's like over 80% occupancy right now. And objectively a good deal for the Atlanta Braves, a smart purchase, providing more parking options for fans and all of that kind of stuff. But the timing of it was absolutely dreadful. On Wednesday, April 2nd, the Braves were currently sitting at 0-6. They had just lost for the second straight night, this one 3-1 to the Los Angeles Dodgers, and had to go into the Wednesday night matchup, which they also then lost as well. And a lot of Braves fans got frustrated that the team was spending this money on an office complex and not players, hitters, whatever, relievers, all of that stuff. So I thought, let's sit down. Let's talk about where the Braves get their money from, how this whole thing is structured. How much are they making off the Battery Atlanta anyway? And I want to set up front, a little different from what I usually do. I'm going to set a little bit of like clarifications and ground rules and things like that. The first thing is I am not an expert in all of this stuff, okay? I do have a financial background. So for those of you who don't know, master's degree, like I have an MBA from Auburn University covering finance. I've worked in banking for the last 20 years, whether it's commercial lending, whether it is small business stuff with the SBA. I've never been involved in businesses of this size, with this deals of this size, this much money. You'll see how much money when we get to this. But I have at least a basic understanding of how all of this stuff works. I'm going to do my best to explain that. I do want to make sure everybody understands this is not intended to be investment advice in any way. Do not use anything from this show to decide yes or no, I want to purchase stock in the Atlanta Braves. There's Atlanta Braves Holdings has multiple different ticker symbols, depending on if it's a Series A, Series C stock, whatever it might be. None of this is intended to be investment advice, okay? This is just a high-level overview of where the Braves get their money and where they spend it. And we're able to do this because the Braves are publicly traded, okay? All of the rest of baseball, the books are closed. And all you have to, even the Players Association, when they're negotiating the CBA, even the Players Association doesn't get to see how much money the league makes and each individual team makes. And so teams will commonly go out. There was a story from the Pirates. There was a story about how they're losing money every year. It's likely not true, but we have no way to know. The Atlanta Braves are different. We have filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have quarterly filings. We have annual filings that detail exactly how much money came in to the organization and how much money went out of the organization for different things. And there's 2 reasons to be confident in what is filed with the SEC, okay? The first reason is because these are governmental filings. They are audited by an accounting firm. So it's not just a person throwing stuff into a spreadsheet. This all has to be audited. It all has to follow what's called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. And so it is very rare that a company of this size that has made filings to the Securities and Exchange Commission has things that are incorrect or misstated or things like that. So we can be comfortable in this, that this is an honest accounting. And the reason for that is think about the incentives here, okay? As a publicly traded company, they have the incentive to be accurate to illustrate profitability, if there is profitability, or to illustrate whatever losses they had and why it was a temporary loss because they're publicly traded, right? There are people who own stock in the Atlanta Braves. John Malone owns just under half of all the stock in the Atlanta Braves, right? I feel comfortable that with these financial filings, you get a true picture of the Atlanta Braves organization. If you were going to, let's say, just going to a random team and they were going to open their books for you, you have no way of knowing if they portray everything. Here's an example of something that could not be in the books. The former owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers, Frank McCourt, he owned the Dodgers. He also owned a company that owned the lots around the stadium, the parking lots. And the Los Angeles Dodgers paid his company rent to use those parking lots every single year. Now, if Frank McCourt, and again, he no longer owns the Dodgers, he does own half that company, by the way. He still gets paid for those for use of that parking lot. But if Frank McCourt wanted to show you the Dodgers books, but he wanted you to believe that he as a owner was losing money, he could just not put in the fact that, hey, that parking money goes to a company that he owns. He could just leave that out because it wasn't filed with the government, right? There was no accountability on those books that he was showing you. But when it goes to the government, all of that stuff has to be detailed. All of that stuff has to be included because these are audited. And if these don't pass the audit, it can be very bad, okay? And when we do this, it's important to delineate the structure of the Atlanta Braves, okay? Atlanta Braves Holdings is who we're talking about today. Think of them as having, for lack of a better term, think of them as having two divisions, right? Division number one is the baseball team, okay? So Terry McGuirk is the chairman, president, CEO of Atlanta Braves Holdings. He runs this whole thing. One side of this is the baseball team. Derek Schiller is the president and CEO of the baseball team. I'm going to just say of the Atlanta Braves, okay? Derek Schiller is president and CEO of the Atlanta Braves. He answers to Terry McGuirk, the chairman. Alex Anthopoulos is the president of baseball operations and the general manager of the Atlanta Braves. That's the last time we're going to talk about Alex Anthopoulos today because he doesn't have anything to do with the show. This is where the Braves, as Atlanta Braves Holdings, make all their money. How much does the baseball side bring in? How much does the real estate side come in? That's the other part of this. The other division, for lack of a better word here, Braves Development Company. Mike Plant is the president and CEO of the Braves Development Company. And when you look in the financials, and for this, I am using the 10K that was filed by the team. That is the annual report that was filed with the SEC for fiscal year 2024. And it covers all of the revenue that came in, all of the expenses, and we're going to break all of that down next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsey Crosby trying to help explain where the Braves make money, exactly how much money they're making off of the battery and all that stuff. Okay, so in this 10K filing, and the fun thing here is these are available publicly. You can go to the SEC's website, sec.gov, I believe, and you can pull any publicly traded company's 10K. I've looked at dozens and dozens of these during graduate school, having to do reports, having to write essays and all of that stuff about this. I've used these in my corporate life, right? Working with companies, doing all of that kind of stuff. So in the 10K, the Atlanta Braves detail where their money comes from. It is part 2, item 7, page 2-2. The paging's weird. Don't worry about that. Okay. It's important to delineate how they make money. Each of those divisions, the baseball side and Braves Development Company, the real estate side, each of those makes their own amount of money. Now, I'm not saying they don't mingle or anything. I'm just saying two sources of revenue, right? Baseball revenue, real estate revenue, okay? Baseball revenue, let's start with them first. 2023 and 2024. 2023 was just revenue. So this is just money that came in the door, not accounting for where it went, not accounting for costs, just money that came in the door. The Atlanta Braves made $581.7 million. I'm rounding. It's a lot more exact than that. I'm rounding this here. $581.7 million in 2023. That was off of playing 81 home games and 2 postseason games. And I'll break down where all the baseball revenue comes from in just a second, okay? $581.7 million. In 2024, that went up to $595 million, okay? So they brought in another roughly $14 million more in 24 than they did in 23. Now, they did that despite not having 2 postseason games, because in 2023, they had the series against Philly and they had home games. 2024 was the wild card series on the road, all in San Diego. So 2 less postseason games, and they made more money. They also made more money despite less fans attending games. The average number of attendees per regular season game in 2023 was 32,542 fans. In 2024, with the injuries, the team not being as good as the historic 2023 year, they had 28,469 fans per game. So 4,000 fans less per game, roughly. But yet they made more money. And the cool thing about these annual reports is they break down all of the different ways that they make baseball revenue and where it comes from. Okay? So the 4 areas with which the baseball side makes money. Number 1, seems obvious, baseball games. This is classified as baseball events. So this is 1, the actual games, right? This is ticket sales. This is concessions. This is advertising in the ballpark. This is also suites, sponsorships in the ballpark, premium seat fees, all that kind of stuff, right? That is source number 1. That is the largest of the 2. Okay? In 2024, they made $595 million on the baseball side. $347.9 million of that was baseball events, was the games. It was concessions. It was ticket sales, all of that, okay? So it is by far the largest chunk of money they make is hosting games in the ballpark. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. The reason Atlanta Braves Holdings said they made more money on baseball events despite less games and less attendance is 1, new sponsorship agreements. So adding new sponsors into the ballpark, either replacing a different sponsor at a lower price point or finding a new thing that you can then put a name on and do a sponsorship for. And contractual rate increases on season tickets and existing sponsorship contracts. So existing sponsors may tick up in amounts as you go on the life of the contract. And it actually explains that those increases were offset by reduced attendance and reduced ticket sales and concession revenue because fewer postseason games, less fans coming to games. So despite less fans, they made more money because of sponsorship, both new sponsorships and rate increases, okay? Broadcasting revenue went up to $166.1 million. It had been $160.1 the previous year, so $6 million more. Broadcasting revenue is broken up into a few areas as well, okay? Broadcasting revenue is the national revenue that MLB shares with everybody, right? The ESPN Sunday Night Baseball package, the Apple TV Friday night package, the Fox Sports package that I think they air on Saturday nights or something. All of that stuff, the national stuff, is divided among every team equally. The Braves also have local television revenue. Who broadcast the games? Diamond Sports Group. It was Diamond Sports Group. It's now known as something else. I believe it's now known as Main Street Sports Group or something like that. But to do the television broadcasts in the Braves market, you have that. You have Radio broadcasting, Dickey Broadcasting, they have an agreement. It's the largest radio affiliate network in MLB, 177 local radio station affiliates. All of that stuff together goes into getting your broadcast revenue. That is the second largest bucket. Again, $347.9 million in baseball revenue, like baseball event revenue, $166.1 million in broadcasting. After that, your next one is retail and licensing, $47.8 million. That is selling jerseys. That actually went down, by the way. That is sales of merchandise in the ballpark and other licensing deals. That went from $51.5 million down to $47.8 million because less home games, less attendance at the games, less demand for, I guess, like City Connects and things like that. So that is lower. And then other revenue, $33.7 million is the fourth of the four categories. And for those of you who are doing math real quick on the fly, those other three categories together don't equal baseball events. But that other category, that is spring training revenues. That is concerts in the ballpark. If Pearl Jam were to come and pay the Braves to do a concert in Truist Park, that's where that money goes, into other revenue, from my understanding. So that is where the Braves get their money. Now, at the same time, there are baseball costs as well. That is, and this is classified as costs associated with baseball and stadium operations. So it's payroll. It's also benefits. It's also staff in the front office, right? That's where Alex Anthopoulos gets paid. That's where all of the people who work in the baseball offices for the Braves get paid. That is minor league benefits. All of that stuff is in baseball operating costs. By far, the biggest component of this is major league player salaries, okay? So Atlanta actually went up from $482.4 million in 2023 to $504 million in 2024 on costs. Baseball operating costs, right? Alex Anthopoulos, the players, the coaches, minor leaguers, travel to the affiliates, all of the minor league costs, your roving instructors, your player development, all of that stuff. That's all of that rolls into a $500 million figure. Baseball took in $595. Baseball spent $504. And we're going to get to the overall profitability and all that in the third segment, okay? But this is your baseball income. Baseball events, actual games, by far the biggest component. Broadcasting, retail and licensing, and then other spring training, concerts, etc. Okay? You'll remember the other division, for lack of a better word, in the Atlanta Braves, or in Atlanta Braves Holdings, is the Braves Development Company. This is where the Batteries money that it earns and that they spend comes in. We'll break that down next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today, Lindsey Crosby doing my best to try to break down where the Atlanta Braves get their money from anyway. And, all right, we covered the baseball thing. Again, 2024, the total was $595.4 million in revenue against $504 million in expenses. Okay. The other side of this is what's classified on the 10K filing as mixed use development revenue. This is the Battery Atlanta. Okay. They brought in for revenue $67.3 million in 2024. That is mostly rental income, right? Baseballism pays monthly to have rent in the Battery. Punch Bowl Social, Antico, all of those places pay monthly to be in the Battery. They pay their monthly rent because the Atlanta Braves Holdings owns the building. That is also parking revenue. If you pay to park in a parking garage that's part of the Battery Atlanta, that money goes into there, okay? Sponsorships. That's also, if there's a sponsor for an event, for a specific section, whatever, that is also included in the Battery's revenue. And unlike the baseball team, you'll remember on the baseball side, they brought in $595 and they spent $504. There's the cost to operate the Battery aren't as high. Now, granted, they're not making nearly as much they're bringing in nearly as much as revenue, but they're also not spending nearly as much as a percentage than the baseball side is. $67.3 million brought in for revenue, $9.8 million on costs, on expenses for the Battery. That's maintenance, that building maintenance, all that stuff like that. That is the cost to operate the Battery, right? If you have to pay for police officers to be there to block off streets, staff, cleaning crews, whatever it might be. Let's round that to $9.8 million. So those of you who have been doing back the notebook math, that's a difference of $90 million between the revenue and costs for baseball, and that's high 50s in the revenue and the costs for real estate. There's other things in there as well. The biggest area for Atlanta, I guess there's two things really. A big area is the interest. Okay. Again, in the 10K, this is all broken out. When you look at long-term debt, you look at interest payments, you look at employment agreements, you look at lease obligations and other obligations, capital maintenance of Truist Park, all that kind of stuff. The Atlanta Braves, in future payments, right, whether it's debt, interest, whatever, have $1.7 billion on the books. Not that unusual, right? They built a lot of real estate. $620 million of that is classified as long-term debt. Okay. But they also have, again, interest payments, employment agreements. And this is where the two sides get a little muddy, right? Because employment agreements of $762.7 million, that includes players. That's players, that's coaches, that's former players, right? If somebody's getting deferred payments, that's an obligation to pay them that they have on the books and all of that kind of stuff, right? So they are making money from the Battery. They are making money from the baseball side. And let me get to that, because on all of these, there's two things you really need to look at. There is operating income. There is net income or net earnings once you add in all of the other things like interest expenses and all of that. And then there's what's called OIBDA, operating income before depreciation and amortization. If you just look at operating income, the Atlanta Braves on paper lose money every year. $39.7 million loss in 2024, right? That is your revenues minus your operating costs and expenses, right? Administrative costs, stock-based compensation, baseball costs, mixed-use costs, and all of that. And then you take that figure and you go down and you account for depreciation, amortization, all of that stuff. You account for interest expenses and all of that. And you get to, again, a net loss. But I mentioned OIBDA, operating income before depreciation and amortization. This is, again, you remember, they have to follow generally accepted accounting principles. This one's a little bit different. But this, in essence, OIBDA is in essence, this shows how efficiently you run your core operations. Okay? So it's operating income as a starting point, and you take out things like depreciation, like amortization. Fun fact, they're not required to report OIBDA. OIBDA is not part of GAAP. It's not a generally accepted accounting principle. They don't have to report this. Part of the reason, part of this, you remember I mentioned in the first segment, the incentives here is they want to, within reason and appropriately, want to show that the company is, even if it's not showing a positive net earning, that the company is running profitably from its core business activities. The team's adjusted OIBDA is $39.7 million positive. And again, that is combining baseball and real estate. Atlanta Braves holdings as a collective unit of both divisions, again, for lack of a better term, has an OIBDA that is positive, but it has net earnings and operating income that is negative. Ultimately, the whole big giant takeaway from this is, yes, the Battery Atlanta makes money. It's very simplistic, or it's maybe not simplistic. It's not the smartest idea in the world to turn around and look at the revenue that the Battery Atlanta brings in and say you should be able to increase your payroll by that amount, because there are so many other things that are accounted for in this. When you go to Fangraphs, remember how I said that the baseball costs were $504 million last year? Fangraphs has the actual cash payroll, not luxury tax, the actual cash payroll of the team last year at $231.9 million. That is the players at the major league level when you adjust for the money they sent to other teams. They sent money to the White Sox for Max Stassi. They sent money to the Pirates for Marco Gonzalez. They got money from the Giants for Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson. They got money from Boston for Chris Sale. All of the salaries, even some of the guys who were not here very long. Joey Wendell got $19,892 from the Braves because he wasn't here very long before they let him go. When you look at all of that, you can see the Braves spent $232 million in payroll last year. But their baseball costs were more than double that at $504. I'm not doing this show to say the Braves should or should not be spending more money on payroll. I'm not doing this money to try to sway you one way or the other. I just want to explain, because people have asked, they're printing money hand over foot in the Battery. Where's it going? Or where's all this Braves money going? That is the picture of where the Atlanta Braves get their income. If something like this was useful, if you have another topic you want to deep dive on, there was no game tonight. I figured, why not? Let's go ahead and release a bonus show and talk about this. If you want to hear more things like this, if you have questions, things you want me to break down, let me know. You can email us, contact@bravetoday.com. I'm on social media at Crosby Baseball. The show, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we have all of those as well. If this was useful for you, by the way, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review if you're on audio. That could be Apple, Spotify, whatever Google uses nowadays. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop the next episode. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.